Go ahead.
So, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in Canada on this lovely Friday. I guess today we're here to talk to you about managing and responding to the vulnerability data deluge. With us today is myself, Dennis Hayson Wong, representing coming from CanSSOC as well as McGill University. We have Paul Weber coming from Ryerson, as Rob Milman from SAIT. Sorry, I lost my controls. It's definitely a Friday. So I'm pretty sure that if you've been going through a few of the other presentations, you've seen this picture before, just as a reminder of kind of bringing into the whole context of how CanSSOC is a part of a nice large shared fabric, including a lot of interaction with different organizations around Canada, including CUCHIO, as we'll see as part of this presentation, and always looking to do things in partnership. So probably just jumping right into the topic today. I guess we really want to be here today to talk about the vulnerabilities and how they affect institutions. So the reality we have today is that, well, as we all know, vulnerabilities are really here to stay. There's a lot of shiny new things. We have lots of new products, new applications and features, but at the same time, this introduces a lot of new attacks and new techniques that even affect very old things. And well, essentially the only constant in IT is change. Part of this is also with that change is mistakes are always going to happen. It's just commonplace these days. And not to mention, there's this increased motivation now to find these vulnerabilities. There's a lot of money involved in that aspect of it. It's not just the script kiddies looking for fun. According to HackerOne, bug bounties are definitely a thing now. In their bug bounty program, over $44 million were paid out in the last year alone on bug bounties. It's also fairly lucrative for individual researchers. We have at least 9 individuals who, over their, I guess, their career in vulnerability research, have managed to earn over $1 million each on the bugs they found. So we definitely know that there's that huge motivation, whether it's selling it on the black market or even in this very transparent bug bounty. And on the right, you can definitely see that year on year, we see an upward trend of these are just the ones that make it to our CVEs that we are probably pretty accustomed to. And that also leads to a lot of questions. So security is now definitely mainstream news. It's everywhere, especially last year. We've seen a huge visibility in that, especially with the attacks with remote work playing into it. And these questions end up coming to us, the IT staff, not just security professionals. Well, are we vulnerable? What are we actually vulnerable to? What systems are vulnerable? How are we going to fix it all? And are we even getting better? And of course, that really does lead to a lot of challenges for I think every single one of us. I think we've all run into the same situation where we don't really know what to do. There's a huge data overload. There's just so much data now as we have all these different orgs providing data. They're not even providing the same format. They don't use the same words, the same language, and there's duplication. How do we know that they're the same thing? And then, of course, even with that data, there's a whole slew of action. We have the data. What do we actually have to do now with it? Am I taking the right approach? And of course, that whole concept of, well, I'm reacting now. How do I actually get to be able to plan? So part of, just to glaze over this slightly, CanSSOC kind of saw these challenges that people were having, as well as a lot of the different organizations within CUCHIO. And what we're really trying to do is really help with that focus of detection and response, because there's a lot of those vulnerabilities that need to be dealt with. And really, how do we actually help each other respond to these threats? And just to highlight this is one of the reasons of the discussion today is to really talk about, well, what does this mean to an organization in that with the concepts of vulnerability assessment and, of course, the continuous monitoring that many of us are coming from CUCHIO that we're very much, that many of us have seen or been involved in. So data deluge. So my network is seen. Is basically every institution has a public face. Information is everywhere. Internally, we may be doing our own scans, whether it's Nessus or the more widespread or the global Tenable version of it, or the ones using Nexpose, and really perform your internal assessment. But at the same time, we have the attacker. They don't stop, and as we all know that they're probing our networks. They're also using third-party tools like ZoomEyes, Shodan, or they're even harvesting information from Pastebin or even the dark web. There's a lot of partners as well that are doing this with the white hat approach. We have things like BitSight and Security Scorecard. We're very much focused on the benchmarking. The Canadian government, with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, they're providing a lot of external visibility. Other services like Shadow Server or Dorkbot are also providing different aspects of it. It's just more and more data that's becoming available to us. And of course, then we also have CanSSOC, who's also looking at different ways of giving a different viewpoint. So trying to leverage some of that Shodan data, and even performing additional Nessus scanning. So that's one area where CanSSOC is trying to actually provide a bit more of a contextual approach, and providing another data point where they're actually looking at doing massive port scanning against an institution and then being able to enumerate those vulnerabilities in a holistic approach. Part of this is also to pool resources together to share this infrastructure built by higher ed for higher ed, or well, education for education. But that's still more data. We have all this data. What are we actually going to do with it? So you have data sets coming from Nessus, data sets coming from BitSight, data sets coming from Shodan, and much more. It's not useful until you can actually make sense of it. And that's one of the approaches that we're trying to introduce now, is the same way that internal vulnerability scanning, you took one data set, you aggregated and took a viewpoint. Now we're trying to take all of these different data sets, aggregate it together, and then trying to reap some larger benefits from it with comprehensive data sources, multiple source confirmation or validation with higher confidence, and bringing in some of that work that analysts used to have to do, which was normalizing that data, making sense and standardizing. Well, I have this information from Nessus. How does that correlate to that BitSight scan? How is that correlating to what we're seeing in Shodan, and making this available in a more centralized platform? But that data is just data. The real benefits are really coming from the analysis. And I think that's kind of one of the challenges that a lot of us will run into as well, is that analysis paralysis. And I definitely know I'm guilty of it sometimes as well. It's time to act, but I've got a lot of data. Where do I do it? What do I do with it? Where do I actually begin? So I'm going to take this as an oversimplification, but really kind of we have two types of activities, and they both provide significant amounts of value to an organization. You definitely have that whole top-down planning where there's a lot of change management, and people need to look at a bigger picture to strategically tackle long-term and look at the progression over time. But at the same time, we have that other side of the coin where the people on the ground, they're running, they have to react. You have incident response. And this requires that quick, timely response to these incidents. And it's extremely tactical. You need to address that risk and as close to real time as possible. So that kind of leads us into the whole data out scenario. So now that we have that data aggregated, we can actually try to figure out, well, how do we feed those two different paths? And in our context, we actually are trying to, we have two different, two outputs essentially, where we're looking at it from an analytical perspective, where one option that we have is trying to leverage tools like business intelligence to really take a look at that data and to create plans, timelines, etc. And and on the other side is really taking a look at how do we make very pertinent, actionable alerts and reports that an organization can act on immediately and even feed back into their planning process. Because even those timely, those reports and the benchmarks, etc., are extremely valuable in the planning scenarios. So for those of you who have been with us on I guess on that CanSSOC journey as well, we've probably seen hints of this or examples of this. But one of the things that we've looked at is how do we actually provide interactive dashboards to help organizations make sense of or simplify their viewpoints of the vulnerability data. So one of the things that we've done is tried to find ways to visualize this, something that is useful to different levels of the organization, where we can actually show, as you can see with the graph, some of the trending. How are we doing over time? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Are we seeing the cycles of vulnerability detection and patch remediation, right? Are we seeing those trends? Is my overall risk, or how are we actively tracking it? Is it trending downward or not? But at the same time, how do we actually um, identify what's strategic to tackle potentially? So looking at things like, is my, it looks like, is my SSL and TLS kind of my higher area of risk? Is it affecting a large number of hosts? Is that something that I want to tackle holistically? Or which applications or which protocols should I be looking at because they are the ones that impact me the most? But at the same time, I guess this is something that what we also need to do is learning on what do we actually react on. And I think this is something that Paul Weber can help talk to us about.
Yeah, so how do we know what to react on? So I guess that's where we're hoping continuous monitoring may be able to help. The idea is to get a daily email out to institutions that will basically contain observations and data points that represent an external view of what an institution might look like from the internet. And the hope is, I mean, the the attackers are always poking at our front door, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for weaknesses. So the hope is that we can try to prioritize some of these observations, give you a place to start, um, you know, um, bring vulnerabilities that need to be remediated to the surface, maybe point out some configuration weaknesses that might need to be addressed. Next, Jason. So a little bit about continuous monitoring. It spawned out of the CUCHIO benchmarking project. This is the second year that continuous monitoring is running. Last year in 2020, we had 72 institutions receiving continuous monitoring emails. And this year we have 83. Next. When we, I guess through the benchmarking project, we gained access to all this BitSight data in the form of observation. So it seemed to make sense to get this data since it's useful out to various institutions. These are some of the observation types that we can get through BitSight. And some of them are, telling us about botnet infections or web application headers that need to be improved, or maybe open ports, risky open ports, or TLS versions that are old. And so when we started doing continuous monitoring last year, each one of these observation types was an email with a CSV file in it. But we've made some improvements since then. Hayson. So what we did was we combined all those observations into a multi-tabbed Excel workbook. And that workbook has a cover page that kind of summarizes what observations we're seeing. And another improvement we made was marking new observations versus reoccurring, because there's just so much data there. It's hard to know like what to look at first. And then we also started prioritizing observations, the CVEs based on CVSS3 to kind of bring those to the top. And then another thing we did was we started reporting when your BitSight rating or if your rating changes from BitSight. So if there's a 5% change or more, we'll let you know about it. And then you can kind of have a look and see what are the contributing factors to that. And maybe that's another place to go looking to see if there needs to be improvement. And then the other thing we added was HTML formatted body to the email, where we can display important information that we want you to see right away. Also, BitSight has another data type, and they're pretty good at collecting this. So what they do is they infrastructure profile on an institution, and they take domains, IPs, and networks, and they attribute them to that institution. And the way that they learn this is through various data sources such as BGP, ARIN, WHOIS, DNS server, DNS, and certificates. So we've taken this data, and now that's a tab as well in the Excel workbook where you'll see if a new domain has been created that's attributed to your institution or a new network, or et cetera. This is just an example of what the email body would look like in the emails that you would get from us. And so if you had a rating change, you would see this. In this example, there was a 5% drop in your overall score. And if you look at the rating change contributors, it looks like your potentially exploited observation type went from 10% to 0%. So that would prompt you to go and look at the potentially exploited tab in the Excel workbook to see what might have changed. And then this is also something we would put in the email body. And so if you have a really high CVSS score of 3 or like a severe vulnerability, this would show up in the email body. It tells you the host name, when the vulnerability was first seen and last seen, an explanation about it, high level of how to remediate it, and then a NIST link to get some more information. And this is the cover page in the workbook I spoke about. In the first column there, it lists the different observation types that we're reporting on. And then there's another column there of how many new items were for that observation, how many reoccurring items is the next column. And then just a link there at the end to the appropriate. And then this is just an example of the patching observation type to give you an idea of what it looks like. In this case, they show you the various CVEs and the score for each one. And again, sort of the remediation and explanation. And each observation type has different columns and fields, whatever is pertinent to that one. So some improvements to come. So far, we've been prioritizing based on CVSS3 for vulnerabilities, but we'd also like to include some education, some institutional context. So what we want to do is start collecting information about the criticality of different IPs and subnets for an institution. So if there's some kind of observation that's relating to the data center, or a PCI network or something like that, then we can give it a higher priority. But if it's an observation about an infected host on the wireless network or residents, maybe we can lower the priority a bit. Another use case we've been working on is the idea of telling an institution when a new IP or port shows up internet facing or visible to the internet from their institution. So BitSight already has some of this data, but it's not perfect, it's not complete, they don't have everything. But Shodan's also pretty good at detecting this stuff. So what we're hoping to do is to kind of combine those together and start reporting on risky applications that might be exposed to the internet, something like RDP or a database. Maybe there was a and just for visibility, right? So maybe accidentally a firewall role was opened and some IPs on the internet that's not supposed to be all of a sudden. So the idea is to kind of put that all into a tab in the workbook, and then you can go there and see when something new is open to the internet and kind of have that visibility and sort of that mental checkbox, like, oh, okay, like that one I know about, that's okay, that should be there. And then eventually we'd like to also include the tenable data for an even more complete view. As Hayson was saying, kind of taking all these different data sources, normalizing it, getting one holistic view that we can then go and report on, and deduplicating it so we don't have 3 alerts from 3 different data sources. But,
hello, everybody. So yeah, we're going to give you a little bit of a real world scenario of what we're doing here at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. So there's a gratuitous picture of our institution. Sunny Calgary, it's in the mid 30s here this week, so it's beautiful out here. But we wish we were in Montreal with the rest of everybody else too as well. Next slide, please. So we were an early adopter with the CanSSOC threat feeds. And then in January this year, we were approached to sign up for the CanSSOC vulnerability pilot by Joe Kowalchuk and team. I was happy to jump on board right away. We've had such great experience with the threat feed and everything, and we're very excited about what's happening with CanSSOC and everything that's going on today. So we jumped on it right away. Actually surprised the team, I think, about how fast we responded. But it was kind of a no-brainer. You know, we're looking at hiring third parties to conduct vulnerability scans, and CanSSOC was offering this to us for free. So, you know, as a typical public institution, anywhere where we can save money is a key thing. Plus, this is also a lot more up our alley for sure. So the onboarding process I can speak to was extremely easy. It was just providing CanSSOC with our IP range, which is typical /16, you know, like most institutions have here in Canada, plus all of our IPv6 ones too, which there's, I don't even know how many thousands of IPs that is. But the onboarding was seamless. Getting us onto the Power BI platform was easy to do. It's all up in Azure, and just getting us permission and access to the dashboard was great. I figured out how to navigate the dashboard very easily, and I really like the single kind of pane of glass look at our external presence and what we look like to the rest of the world. You know, we've been a BitSite user for a number of years now, thanks to Brian Lesser and everything that he's doing with that. But the CanSSOC threat or vulnerability dashboard, it was really helpful to us. And what we did, me and the CIO came up with this idea. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, BHAG, but that's a big, hairy, audacious goal. And what we did is we presented this to the infrastructure team and showed them kind of our BitSite rating, where we looked in the education sector, how we looked at on the vulnerability dashboards, and said, we'd like to be #1. We would like SAIT to become the #1 institution, like everybody can look to us. And it's a huge goal. And it's, you know, may or may not be achievable, but I'm hoping that we can do it. But one of the things that I challenged the team was to just try and look at what we have for data now and remediate them. And I'm really happy to say that I just actually thanked them yesterday, because I was looking at the dashboard, and we started out in February with 160 vulnerable hosts on our full Class C network, and we're down to 32 in a few short months, just because the team has been getting these reports and looking at them and really understand the remediation activities behind them. And it's been a really good experience, and I'm hoping that we can drive that number down further and further as we move along. So yeah, we pull the reports from the dashboard, we give it to the infrastructure team, we get these weekly scans, so they get that constant feedback too, that what they're doing is actually making a difference. And it's really good, and I'm really looking forward to the integration with more data, Shodan and BitSite, tying it all together. I think it's going to be a really good platform for everybody, and I'm happy to talk about it to anybody who wants to ask questions about it for sure. It's been a really great and easy experience, and I'm really happy to be working with the team.
Thank you very much for that great insight. And I think that's probably a story that a lot of us can appreciate as well and learn from. So definitely hoping to have some more conversations with you on how we can better move forward. And speaking about moving forward is, I know Paul had talked a lot about how the benchmarking and the Cuccio continuous monitoring aspects that he's built it, and where we're going forward with that. But at the same time, there's a lot more that we want to do as well, holistically with CanSSOC and with, I guess, with educational institutions in partnership. And some of those are really that prioritization of what's useful data, where do people really want to see included, if or that they would think that there's value from, and we're definitely listening. But at the same time, trying to bring things together, because part of this is also how do we improve that user experience, as kind of what Rob was mentioning there, that single pane of glass. If that helps improve the user experience, it's something that we want to see and try to accomplish as well. And definitely, a lot of this is very much community driven. So features for the users of the platform, and we just want to make sure that we can hit those targets as well. Because if it's not useful, there's no point in doing it, right? That being said, I guess we went through this entire deck pretty quickly. I guess leaving more time for questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer them. But also at the same time, giving people parts of the day, especially for a large number of people, is probably lunch hour as well. So definitely, it's very. We can go well, hands up or informal with the conversation. Just trying to bring up the chat to see if there's any questions there. So confidence scores. So I guess in the context of both, I guess what Paul presented in the continuous monitoring and the alerts, as well as what we're doing at the vulnerability dashboard so far. Currently, a lot of the scores right now are based on the CVSS entries. There is some forward CVSS v2 and v3. There is some plans to actually make improvements on that, and that's part of the discussions that we definitely are having internally, but also with other institutions, is what actually makes gives people the right context to make it actionable. And that goes into that whole, how do we make the values mean something to the users. But so far we've been trying to standardize on that common normalization of CVE and the CVSS scores associated with them. And I think Brian has also answered that in the chat as well. There is that concept that there are going to be items that don't necessarily match up with that, and that's definitely part of that ongoing discussion. Are there any other questions, comments? I know Jill, I think, is Jill on the call as well? Yes, she is. So definitely we can talk about the other things around continuous monitoring and vulnerability scanning as well.
I guess I was wondering if is anyone else using the nightly reports that we send out so far? Anyone on the chat actually seen one of those and used it, or is using it for anything, or plans on using it, or has made it kind of part of their day, or at least a couple times a week having a look at it?
Well, I know that we are actually, just to not leave Paul hanging. We definitely are, and I think Rob is definitely. If anyone else has, or is anyone, I guess the other question that could be asked around that is anyone else not and interested in actually participating? And it's definitely a conversation that I think we can start having, or if anyone wants to share a contact for them to reach out to, that'd be probably a great next step. I see we have another couple of questions in the chat as well. Machine learning, that's a great question. So currently there isn't machine learning being used in this purpose. I definitely think that it's a very interesting topic, because there's definitely companies out there like CanSSOC that are leveraging machine learning to understand vulnerability context in an organization, even almost predicting which systems could be vulnerable. It is something that we would want to look at eventually. It's just about building up the foundation as well from that perspective. Definitely there's a lot of avenues where machine learning can be quite valuable in this, especially when it comes down to how do we normalize data better and finding those parallels. So it's definitely something that we are keeping in the back of our mind. So Brian has a question for the community about whether or not how useful it was been for importing the nightly feed into the sim. Um, it's probably a bit of an open question. Maybe Paul, would you want to? Would you be able to give details about how you may have leveraged those alerts for your sim integration or incident response process?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess I haven't directly brought it into our sim, but I am using it to sort of keep an eye on vulnerabilities and open ports. One thing I'm kind of trying to do internally is take, and because I'm working on this continuous monitoring piece, it's sort of making it so I'm working on two things at once, really. But what I was trying to do was sort of, yeah, basically monitor the open ports at our edge for our institution, and sort of keep an eye when new things are open, or when we basically have allow logs show up from our firewall. So the idea is to just, kind of correlate what we're seeing in our sim as allowed versus what Shodan's seeing versus what BitSite's seeing, and to kind of have this constant view of, did we open this firewall rule? Did we accidentally put like SQL or some kind of database on the internet? Did someone turn up an RDP system um, like on our network and expose it to the internet that we weren't aware of? Is somebody, I mean, and this is another thing we're sort of doing with our firewall is also looking and saying, okay, like, how can we see like an RDP application, but not the RDP port? So someone like trying to bypass like, basically our, if we're just looking at it from a port perspective, we expect 338, right? But maybe they're doing it on port like 5,000 or something. But, and so normally that would probably just squeeze by and you wouldn't even realize it's RDP. But we're sort of looking at it from our SIM perspective and saying, okay, well, that actually is being detected by our firewall as RDP, even though it's on port 5,000. And so it's sort of kind of, okay, did Shodan see that? Did they notice that was RDP? And would an attacker on the internet find that? So just trying to take all of this data and sort of merge it together and kind of have like a more holistic view of everything.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting story that you're sharing, because it's definitely a challenge that we have with our sim is, while you're always hunting for things, you don't know if there's that needle in the haystack. But it sounds like definitely that those alerts give you that chance to, well, know that needle's actually there and focus in on that needle with a magnet, right, and then pull it out. So no, I definitely think that's definitely a useful scenario.
Yeah, I agree too as well. We ingest the CanSSOC threat feeds into our SIM and our firewalls, but we haven't gone down the road of putting the vulnerability data into our SIM yet. So that's a next to-do list thing, kind of thing. But I love the idea of doing that too as well, just to tie it all together and again that single pane of glass view.
Yeah, the other thing that I'm looking at too. So a challenge that my team's been facing is that we have all these various business units and faculties, um, and there's this obvious trend, especially since the pandemic, to push services to the cloud, spin this up, spin that up, create this new domain, and we basically have services like all over the place now. That aren't necessarily central IT. I mean, some of them might actually be us, and we have a little more control over it. But because there's a lot of autonomy for faculties and other business units to do things the way they want to do them, we're actually losing a lot of visibility from a security perspective, because we're not always aware of our faculty of arts putting something in Azure, or our continuing education department putting something in AWS, right? So I actually really like the infrastructure data from BitSite that we're putting into the nightly feed, because like, how else do you find out that you have stuff in AWS, right? So I mean, normally you'd have to go hunting, right? You got to look up your domains, look up DNS, look up, look for certificates, BGP, who is like, all these various places to try to figure this stuff out, right? And basically BitSite's in for us, and we're pulling it down and putting it in the Excel workbook now. So so many times I looked at that and I'm like, oh, hey, we have something new in Azure. Okay, that's nice to know, and it's I just find like it's really eye-opening, because just trying to keep track of all that can be quite difficult. So it's nice to kind of have that sort of that sort of notifier every day when there's something new, and kind of keeping track of it.
Yeah, and it's definitely that whole, I guess that whole, especially with I guess what some of the comments in the chat too about how the pandemic has really changed us, forced us to change the way we think about these things, and especially the way that and that whole shift to the cloud as well. Things are more and more out there. Do we actually know what we don't know? But also at the same time, there's all those different third-party sources that are looking for these things. It's a lot of data to sift through to figure out how do we actually bring it all together. There's a lot of analyst work in order to try to aggregate that and to make sense of it. I think that's one of the benefits of bringing it all together, or leveraging these strategic tools to create those alerts, and identifying those things such that we can actually take the right actions. Definitely there's a lot of technical, and does it actually make sense to stand up a lot of that infrastructure and use machine learning and monitoring the cert stream for a new TLS or SSL certificate, or passive DNS, etc. How do we get all that data together and actually keep an eye on on what our external or virtual or even reputational visibility looks like, and then bring in the security aspects as well.
Yeah, that's exactly why we jumped on it so fast, because when the pandemic hit and we all went remote, we very quickly discovered that our entire security platform is all on premise. Our SIM is on prem, vulnerability scanning is on prem, and we had no visibility of what was going on in the cloud. So when CanSSOC started to provide information, and BitSite was also giving us information, having all that external data available to us helped us immensely figure out what we looked like from the outside world in, because we knew what we looked like from the inside out, but we didn't know what we looked like from the outside in. And this is where this has become extremely helpful to help us, lock down our systems, and it's been really, really great for sure.
Yeah, and actually, when I think about it, if you've heard about the threat feed from some of the other talks this week that CanSSOC's put on, so there's kind of like applying a control there, and blocking a lot of the known bad IPs from sort of probing at your edge and looking for vulnerable systems and misconfigurations, right? So that's cool, because we're kind of like, known bad, block those, great. But at the same time, we're not just relying on that. We're looking at our open ports, our vulnerabilities, our CVEs, and we're fixing those and improving them. And like we're making like the door, for the attackers, smaller and smaller and smaller, and we're looking at it from more than one aspect. So I think the combination of the two is really taking away a lot of your internet footprint, from the attackers, and giving them less to target, which I think is great.
So there was another question in the chat regarding, I guess, filtering of alerts, especially when there's probably some things that we definitely that a lot of us are may have seen as well, that there's certain vulnerabilities or risks that we can't address, whether it's a system that we can't really deal with because it's not really under jurisdiction, or even things like that have that are accepted, like BitTorrent. Is that something that that we have the ability to filter on, or is it something that we'd be looking to potentially do?
Yeah, I mean, so from a continuous monitoring perspective, okay, like we haven't really talked about filtering per se yet. We're still looking at kind of normalizing and combining the data, and prioritizing it. Sort of filtering light might be, if we were to prioritize by IP and subnet and institutional context, where's the BitTorrent data or the BitTorrent traffic gonna come from, right? Probably most likely your wireless and some places that are less important, if I had to guess. At least that's how it is at my institution. So maybe by prioritizing data center or other kind of server networks, PCI and things like that, maybe the BitTorrent traffic data will still be there, but maybe just not front and center, sitting at the top of the pile. And maybe that'll help for a little while. But yeah, perhaps we do need to be able to do some filtering down the road as well. It's just not an immediate thing we're working on.
I definitely think that aligns well with what I guess what we were talking about today a lot about. Well, we need to have that ability for planning and knowing what's there, and then of course that how do we react, and definitely trying to build and customize the solutions or enhance the solutions to actually meet those workflows is I think something that's quite important for each one of us.
Yeah, one of the things we've done in BitSight is identified our IP address range where, say, the student wireless network is, and it's all BYOD. If we get a botnet infection on there, there's not much we can do about it, right? So we've prioritized though that traffic as low in BitSight, and really just keep our web servers and everything that we manage and the services that we manage in IT up at the high level, and all of the the student facing sites and things like that that are full of student infected machines, and it's all a public network and everything like that that's on our campus. We mark that as low in BitSight so that it's not too chatty for us. Helps a lot.
I think someone's asking wireless as an eduroam. Yeah, I mean it could be eduroam. It could be like a distinct student network. I mean I guess our whole point of getting institutional context is really just to, tell us what's important to you, right? Like, I mean, I can assume some things that are probably mostly right, but there's probably things I don't know about your institution, right? So like I tend to think, if there's BitTorrent traffic coming from your data center, you probably want to know about that, right? So yeah, I mean, basically this is not done yet, but we're working on it, early days. There's a web interface type thing we're working on to basically ingest from institutions, kind of like IP networks, and and likely we'll take in some kind of prioritization there on how important that network is. And then, this is sort of like asset management light, right? Like, I mean, to kind of get information about every IP and domain and everything for every institution, that's quite the challenge. And I think a lot of us probably even struggle to do that within our own institutions. But I guess we're hoping that most institutions should have some idea by subnet, hey, like this is an important subnet, that's a less important subnet. And hopefully we can do something with that to yeah, bring more important alerts to the top. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, there's different versions of wireless, right? Yeah. So at Ryerson, yeah, like we also have eduroam. We have we actually I mean it's seen as one wireless, student and staff wireless, but we actually they're kind of split, but no one really sees that in the front end. So yeah, and other institutions might do it differently, but and then there's also residents as well. Or maybe you even have a honeypot, right? So maybe that's a low priority because like you don't really care if it's got old versions of software on it. Maybe that doesn't need to be at the top because it's purposely vulnerable, right? Or maybe you have like a Tor exit node, and you want to lower the priority on that because there could be things coming out of there that are questionable. So yeah, so we're just trying to apply some kind of weighting so that we can when we're looking at, say, two vulnerabilities, and one of them's high and one of them's critical, and the high ones for the data center and the critical ones for the somebody on your wireless, probably we'll put the data center one higher than the wireless one.
Oh, and it's definitely an interesting conversation around that, because it's definitely the biggest challenge between going from vulnerability scanning and assessment to vulnerability management is really understanding the context, and everyone has a different context. It's definitely something that we're thinking about, and as Paul has mentioned, and it's definitely something we want to try to address, but considering the different contexts, that's why we want to move forward and really understand and reach out and work with the community to figure out what's the best approach to that. What is it that really people really care about? Or what really matters? And I think Rob kind of mentioned that. And what's the impact? Is it high? What's the priority? What's the how much do I actually care about these different areas, right? So no, I'm glad to hear that there's a lot of people thinking the same way. It means that I guess we're all heading down the same path in the same direction.
Yeah, that's one thing that I'm really excited about. I've been doing this for over 25 plus years, and for a lot of years it's been, I'm not telling you what I'm doing and what's happening, because I really increase my risk of people knowing what we're doing and what kind of defenses we have. But now I see us working together. I keep calling it glasnost. For those of you who remember the 80s when Gorbachev and Reagan tore down the wall in Berlin. But I see that is what's happening right now in the cybersecurity industry. Is everybody seems to be wanting to work together because they realize that the bad guys are all working together to attack us, right? And so by us, the good guys defending together, we're a lot stronger. And that's really what I see for this entire engagement and everything that we're doing, is that we're so much stronger by working together as a single team.
Do we have any more questions or comments or thoughts or?
And if there's any, if you have questions or things that come up afterwards, by all means, you can reach out to CanSSOC and Cuccio and Ryerson for those that feedback.